Welcome to this explainer. Look, we've got to jump right into this because things are absolutely boiling over at St. James Park. It has been a wildly turbulent summer transition for Newcastle United. The beloved Eddie Howe is out. A massive chunk of their starting 11 has literally packed their bags, and a brand new, totally unproven manager has just walked through the doors. So today, we're going to unpack exactly what's happening behind the scenes on Tyneside. We'll be using insights, debates, and honestly some sheer panic from the fans and pundits over at TalkSport. Let's get right into the ultimate guide to the Newcastle rebuild.
Here is our roadmapper today. 1. A new era begins. 2. The great talent exodus. 3. Rethinking the recruitment strategy. And 4. Predictions for the season.
All right, Section 1. A new era begins.
Now I want you to lock this specific number in your head, 12th. That is exactly where Newcastle finished last season, and let's be real, this is the exact benchmark the new manager is going to be judged against. There's a pretty strong consensus among the fan base right now that, while Eddie Howe did an unbelievable job getting them to the Champions League a couple of seasons back, last season was just an uphill struggle. In-game decisions were getting questioned left and right, and as some pundits pointed out, the atmosphere just went a little bit stale. So the ultimate question is, can the new regime actually improve on 12th?
And the contrasting dynamic here is just fascinating. On one hand, you had Eddie Howe, beloved by the fans, probably the best manager they've had in years, but whose project had seemingly just hit a brick wall. On the flip side, we have Matthias Jaissle. Now, Jaissle is stepping into the spotlight with a really impressive resume of winning cups in other leagues, but, and this is a massive but, he has absolutely zero Premier League experience. None. He is walking into one of the most demanding stadiums in world football, and he basically has to hit the ground running from day one.
But hey, despite all the outside noise and doubts, the front office is projecting total confidence. Listen to this quote from CEO Yazan Al-Sharif. He said, "I think he can do it with the squad that he has. Maybe in the top 10, let's say, better than the last year." He completely acknowledges that the start of the season is brutal. I mean, they're facing Spurs and Liverpool super early on, but he really believes the foundation is already there. According to the board, it's just a matter of Jaissle adapting this current team to his specific brand of football. But, as we're about to see, that squad that he has looks very, very different today than it did just a few short months ago.
Which brings us to Section 2, the great talent exodus. Just take a look at these massive names: Alexander Isak, Sandro Tonali, Anthony Gordon, Elliot Anderson, Yankuba Minte, Bruno Guimaraes. When you literally stack them up like this, it drives home the severity of the squad depletion way faster than words ever could. We aren't just talking about squad rotation players here. This was the heartbeat, the engine room, and the primary goal-scoring threat of the entire football club. Jaissle isn't just taking over a team, he's basically taking over a construction site where half the premium materials were just sold off.
So the crucial thing is comparing who left with who is actually stepping up to replace them. You've got the outgoing star power on one side and the incoming or remaining core on the other. We're talking Harvey Barnes, Tino Livramento, Lewis Hall, and newer additions like Jacob Ramsey and Anthony Elanga. Are they bad players? Absolutely not. There is undeniable talent there, for sure. But as the pundits rightly pointed out, it simply isn't a like-for-like replacement. You're trading established, world-class, game-changing superstars for younger, developing prospects who now suddenly carry the absolute weight of St. James Park on their shoulders.
And all that pressure brings us to this incredibly poignant thought from a Newcastle fan named Brian. He was asking, "You're thinking, where are my leaders? It's going to be a scrap of a season." Think about it. When you lose Gordon, Tonali, Guimaraes, and Isak, you aren't just losing goals and assists. You are losing the vocal anchors of that dressing room. Brian points out that younger guys like Hall or Livramento might actually be looking around right now wondering who is going to take the mantle. Because if no one steps up to fill that leadership vacuum, well, it's going to be an incredibly long and difficult winter in the Northeast.
Which naturally leads us to Section 3, rethinking the recruitment strategy.
To really understand why the squad looks the way it does right now, we've got to look at the timeline. Historically, Newcastle had this highly successful model of buying 21 to 22-year-old rising stars. Think back to the early days of bringing in players like Sven Botman. They developed them and their value just skyrocketed. But then, about 18 months ago, right after making the Champions League, the club allegedly gave Eddie Howe and his nephew, Andy Howe, full power over recruitment, and the entire strategy shifted. They started buying older, established Premier League players instead. Fast forward to this summer, and the architect of their original successful youth model, Chief Scout Steve Nixon, is packing up and leaving the club for Wrexham.
Now you really have to notice this exact phrase, fingers severely burnt. This came from a caller named Robert, who honestly perfectly summarized that 18-month failed experiment. When the club gave the manager full power to sign experienced Premier League guys instead of finding those hidden gems, the signings just didn't pull up any trees. The club spent heavy money, the squad actually regressed, and the front office got their fingers burnt. It's pretty much a classic cautionary tale of what happens when a club abandons a data-driven, scout-led youth model for quick-fix established names.
Which makes this next insight from the fans so profound. As Robert says right here, Steve Nixon leaving is the biggest loss for Newcastle. It's really hard to get a good recruitment guy who's got a real good eye. Fans are legitimately arguing that losing a 15-year veteran scout is actually a far heavier blow to this rebuild than losing Eddie Howe. You know, you can always hire a new head coach, but finding a recruitment director who can spot a diamond in the rough and polish them into a Champions League player, that is quite literally the rarest skill in modern football.
All right, let's wrap things up with Section 4, predictions for the season.
First up, we absolutely have to showcase this gem of a quote from Robbie, a Newcastle fan who called in. Quote, "Well, fellas, we're going to win the league, aren't we?" You just got to smile at that. It brilliantly represents that classic, blind preseason optimism that makes football fans so special. Even after losing their absolute best players, there is still a pocket of the fan base that believes Matthias Jaissle, because he's a proven winner in other leagues, might just capture lightning in a bottle and shock the world.
But then, we have to slam back into reality for a second. Check out this incredibly grounded observation from the TalkSport host. They said, "I think it's bottom half of the table, and at certain points it's going to be squeaky. Look, when you lack leaders and you're relying heavily on unproven wingers and fullbacks to carry the creative load, things can go wrong fast." The host even compared it to West Ham's recent struggles, noting that if they can't string some wins together early on, it turns into a nightmare really quickly. They even joked that this changing room is going to need a ghetto blaster just to inject some much-needed energy and vibes back into the squad.
So that basically leaves Newcastle teetering on a tightrope between two massive extremes for this season. On one hand, they could rally. The new young core could gel instantly under a dynamic young coach, and they fight for European contender status. On the other hand, if injuries hit key players like Livramento or Barnes and the lack of Premier League experience haunts Jaissle, they could easily be dragged into a really gritty relegation scrap. Both of these outcomes rely entirely on how quickly the manager can turn St. James Park back into a place where opponents absolutely dread to play.
Which leaves us with this final burning question to chew on. Can a manager with zero Premier League experience truly rebuild a fortress? Matthias Jaissle definitely has the tactical pedigree, but he doesn't have his star players, he doesn't have his club's veteran scout, and he is operating in the most unforgiving league in the world. It's an incredibly compelling storyline, and we are going to be watching closely to see if he sinks or swims. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we will see how this monumental task unfolds for Newcastle United.